Hi, Michael. This is Anurag and Michael this time. And we are covering the ongoing discussion of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke. And today we'll be discussing episodes 25, The Clash, and 26, Cognitive Science, kind of a setup for that. And I'm excited about these two episodes because I feel that we are finally getting to a fantastic turning point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when I started reading these, I'm like, okay, he's starting to put it together. I mean, the threads of why the crisis, when the train went off the tracks, basically, sort of thing. And that's interesting. It's a fascinating thing to have someone lay out in that kind of detail. With that sort of thread so far back in history, too. I mean, it's been a long time coming. We've
Exactly.
spent, more than 24 hours of listening or reading, but it's a lot more because you have to think about it to get to the place where he's now, okay, here's why this, here's what this resulted in, and here's where it started falling off.
Now, if we were to just stop here for sake of exercise, right? It would be a fantastic tour de force of just going through the history of how meaning was made and the history of ideas, philosophy, especially of the Western mind, and how at every epoch, every era decided to create meaning, or meaning was created through the psychotechnologies and the belief systems and the practices and all that would be in and of itself very enlightening. But I think
I agree, yeah.
But that as a setup is even more interesting.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've been really grateful to have his perspective on the history of all these things, because I didn't know much, and especially not in this sort of connective way.
Yeah.
And there's certain things he brings up that I can't wait to talk to you about, because I have some questions or ideas about what he's saying that I'd like to go through.
Why don't you tee up the episode of The Clash where he talks about everything coming together and clashing?
Okay, so let's see if I can do this justice. Um, so, okay, I mean, we look at how it comes together from the last episode, which is we talk about Hegel, who intellectualized everything but didn't include certain aspects of knowing that are essential for integration, which is perspectival and participatory. Is that right? Did I get one of those wrong?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
That's right. Okay, so and these also how it's morphing because of Hegel, because of the Gnostics, into this fanaticized version and dysfunctional version of religion, or what religion is supposed to be for, right? Which is to help us transform and change frame in a way that we get closer and closer to relating to reality in a way that's useful. I mean, I think that's kind of our effective in a good way. That's kind of how I'm interpreting it. But the thing that I think is so fascinating is how what he's saying, what I hear him say, is that with the lack of a cohesive structure of transformation, which would be, in the past, that's religion, things fall into being politicized instead. And they also go into these super dysfunctional, idealized versions of what utopia would be. And then, of course, that's leading to just absolutely horrible results. And because now things that used to be are reduced to a political viewpoint instead of a more nuanced sort of understanding. And let me see if I can find this part oh yeah. The perspectival knowing has been reduced to political viewpoint, and participatory knowing has been reduced to your political identification.
Activism.
What's that?
Activism. Political
Exactly.
activism.
And it's exactly what we're seeing now. And it's like all these protesters and stuff, they're acting like religious fanatics, because they are actually, it's dysfunctional religious. And but then that marshals all these resources that get, go into things like the Soviet Union, which was just absolutely and unbelievably destructive. Same with the Nazi Germany, but even, what happened in World War I and II, both the amount of death being unbelievable, all driven by ideology, by the way, instead of anything else. Then, so let's see. The other thing that I found really interesting too is how he talks about how communities have what he calls structural distributed cognition, which is a very interesting thing, because this is exactly what polyvagal theory talks about. It says that they actually call it stress regulation or stress processing, is a community, and it's a community project. It's not just by yourself. So you're only as regulated emotionally as everyone else around you. And the reason for that is because you need other people to be with, to help you feel safe and grounded. And you have to work that out together. It's participatory. So he talks about that sort of part. But but the fact that the structural distributed cognition is what creates systematic psychotechnologies. And of course, when that's wiped out, then those psychotechnologies aren't being developed. And therefore, everything just goes into a negative feedback loop where it just starts spiraling down, which is exactly what we're seeing even more of now. So this is the clash. So let's see. The clash, adversal clash of psycho-religious ideologies is not, it says it's not only symptomatic of the meaning crisis. Anyway, and then he's, after that, he jumps into what cognitive science is, which is quite detailed. And then, of course, the next episode, it gets even more detailed. But
staying with the clash for a second, I think what's interesting to draw that out a bit for our own discussion and how that resonated with me. First was that everything is now with a lens of politics. And the fact that we are now drowning in political fights, left, right, center, doesn't matter, right? So the politics has become the primary means of engagement among humans, right? Especially among strangers, like outside of close family and friends, which have a different mode of engaging just because of the virtue of proximity and long-term standing of relationships. When we meet strangers, we don't have any means of understanding each other or connecting or making meaning together except through politics. And then it becomes a litany of belief systems or check boxes that you either subscribe to or not. And what's interesting to me is that he calls out both sides of the spectrum. He says, whether you have he says it's a collapse of idealism. And one spectrum of the idealism is Marxist utopia, secular utopia. And the other extreme is the fascist utopia, that the nation and the state will take care of it. From a superior race point of view, racial superiority view, and other is state superiority view, right? So both of those are like dead ends completely. And both of them driven by this idea that I'm going to will myself to power, and therefore I'm going to impose my view to mold you. I found that very powerful, especially Germany as the center point where all of these come together and clash and destroy in First and Second World War. And it didn't hit me till he pointed out that the fight between fascism and Nazism, with Nazism losing in Second World War, set up the entire communist machinery and the fascist machinery thereafter as the only way of making sense after that.
And I think it's also worth noting that they're extremes, right? So you see the same thing like in America, the extreme right and left, both super fanatical, dysfunctional idiots that are driving the narrative, even though the people in the middle don't necessarily agree, but then they're forced to either side because, the polarization. and they're equally dysfunctional, right? So,
Yeah.
and I've noticed it's something I've noticed through my life, and I really came to understand more clearly in 2020, was that there are fanatics, and it doesn't matter what flavor they put on themselves, it's still the same thing. Because when I grew up, I was really turned off by these fanatical Christians that would say, you're going to go to hell if you don't do what I say. And I'm like, whatever, come on. But then now we have the same thing on the extreme left that says if you don't accept white supremacy, then you're a sinner and you're going to go to, basically, you're going to go to hell. It's like amazing how it's the same stuff.
Exactly.
And it took me a while to sort that out because, and this I think is the point that Vervaeke's making, is that if you have a meaning-making machine or way of going and living that works, then it's not about identifying as a group. It's about identifying reality and then responding to it appropriately, right? So it shouldn't matter what color you are, what anything you are. If you have that in place, then you're going to be able to say, oh, this is bullshit over here and this is sensible. It doesn't really matter who's saying it, right? You're able to sort it out.
Also, to build on that, you also then make sense of it through community's view of what is participating and engaging in dialogue, etc., and through practices and behavior, not just set of propositions.
It's not propositions. Yeah, I think
Forcing
that's,
others to believe with a checklist of my manifesto versus yours.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's again, it's not about a propositional statement. It's about a way of being that brings about better understanding and better outcomes, right? So that's totally different than what people think truth is now.
Even
right?
if you go slightly below just a propositional, the next three levels he calls procedural, and then perspectival, and then participatory, the being part. Even if you look at today at a superficial level and you start arguing with somebody on any proposition, religious or political, which is more popular these days, you can't even get to procedural. You can't even say, okay, let's debate without yelling at each other. That's a procedural thing. It has nothing to do with the content of what we are discussing, right?
That's right.
You can't even get to procedural level of discourse or agreement or alignment. Then below that, forget perspectival, forget my ability to put myself in your shoes and your ability to put myself in yourself in my shoes. Even that's gone. And definitely, we can't even get to the participatory. So it's become so superficial and so shallow that it's a shock.
And there's another layer to this that I've observed and read about over the years. So I've been absolutely astonished, especially recently, but it's been bad years before in certain kind of spurts, how ignorant so many doctors actually are about, because they're so narrow-minded, they can't see beyond what they know. And they don't know how to think. And this isn't me making this up. I actually read this in a New Yorker article, this long article by this surgeon who I've read two of his books since. I can't remember his name. He's originally from India. And he said that in the modern medical system, people are not taught deductive reasoning. And so therefore, no matter what you show up with in their office, they'll give you one of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 diagnoses because they can't think. And I was like, that completely made sense to me because that's exactly been my experience about people showing up to my office with certain diagnoses. And I'm, sometimes it's right, but often it's absolutely wrong. Like, because if it was right, I wouldn't be able to fix them. And I fix them, right? And it's just really, and I say, how many years of college and you don't even know how to think? That's a consequence of what Vervaeke is saying.
Yes.
Because, right, there's not a rounded way of examining things. It's all this propositional, here's the truth you have to memorize and regurgitate, instead of here's the process of discovery that you have to repeat over and over to make discoveries and to sort things out, right?
And later on, he discusses this in a future episode around rationality and reason and how it's more than simply, logically agreeing to a set of propositions. And there's a process of continuing to course correct and self-correct. But it's so the clash is other way also interesting because he says there is a collapse of idealism, which is whether it's fascist view or whether it's a racist view, or both of those have collapsed and now credibly not taken seriously, although that's where most of the ideologies still continue to fester because there's nothing else. And then those who are trying to have a nostalgic view of the past, right, who want to go back to quote unquote the simpler times when everybody believed in the Bible or everybody believed in the six propositions of my favorite faith, whatever that was. So
whatever it is.
if you want to go back to that view, that's also not a viable option anymore because good or bad, we have had the scientific revolution. Good or bad, we can now at least see the untruth of some of those fundamentalist views of life. So in a certain way, we have burned the bridges, right? We don't have the pre-enlightenment luxury of going back to some fundamental primitive set of beliefs, although it's nostalgic to sometimes dream of it or think of it for some people.
Well, it's interesting that Joseph Campbell said every generation needs the myths to be updated for that generation. And I think that's exactly what this is about. I mean, in other words, we need a new form of God, and kind of what he was saying in a way, a new God, but we haven't found it, and we're all like spazzing out around it because we don't know how to do. So
the way he talks it, we need a God beyond God.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think his formulation is very good because at no point does Vervaeke leave the foundation of scientific method, enlightenment, etc., which is what I really love about the way he's approaching it. He's approaching with so much of, I would say, grace towards previous ideas and religious ideas and belief systems. He's not a pure atheist that's rejecting them with malice. He's basically saying there was something good there. And now we need to go back to finding a God without God while being firmly grounded in the knowledge that we have acquired through enlightenment process.
That's right. I think it's a profound thing that he's doing because he's not getting trapped in the polarized thing. And also, I also really love that he gave credit all along to things, psychotechnologies and other approaches from, mostly Christianity, but he talked about other things too. Even though he's a scientist, but he's like saying, the forgiveness and the attraction of the church, because, now everyone was welcome instead of only certain people. And even agape, agapic love and agape. I mean, these are really helpful. They've helped me, these concepts, just knowing them have helped me. So.
And then what he also summarizes that there collapse at three levels: nomenological, normative, and narrative. I'm trying to remember what nomenological is. I'll have to check that out. But
I don't remember.
Normative, meaning what should be the norm? So how do we behave with each other, and what are the oughts in the society, not just the facts? And then narrative, like what's the stories that we tell, the mythology, the metaphors that glue us together because we have a shared sense of story. And then nomenological, he's saying that all three of those have collapsed, and therefore we need to recover that.
Yeah, that's and what I'm sensing is that he's actually he's starting to frame an argument for a certain approach to discovering what it is that our meaning-making machines are now. And then obviously cognitive science and is going to be part of that, because I can kind of feel it coming, I believe.
So nomenological is the science of law and lawmaking, one meaning. Other is the branch of science concerned with formulation of laws explaining nature and natural phenomena.
Okay.
Nomenological includes, I think, metaphysics and our understanding of the nature and how the laws of nature are. So and then normative is the rules by which we want to aspire for norms. And then third is narrative, because we are social beings and storytelling humans to make sense and keep sense together. So I like those three things that he says, all three have collapsed, right? And we need to kind of recover all three of them for us to make meaning.
Well, here's another interesting thing that occurred to me in reading this, is that how long has it been since there was a coherent system? it's been hundreds of years. So I actually even wonder what would it be like to have grown up in a system where that, I mean, in a culture where that was in place. I don't think any of us really know because we've been so far out of it that we don't, and there's all these judgments about the past, about religion and how stupid it was. And these are really popular among the left, especially. And I think, yeah, that doesn't help because it's so arrogant and so disconnected from the fact that you just don't know what you're talking about. I mean, especially given what he's saying in this course. I don't think we really know what it was like to live back then in certain ways because we're so removed from it. I mean, any more than you or I would know what it'd be like to live off the land like American Indians. I mean, I've never done anything like that.
Yeah.
Not even,
Or,
I mean, not really. So
or any pre-enlightenment society when our knowledge was limited and we were living at the edge of our knowledge, whether we were seafaring,
yeah,
folks on coasts of oceanside somewhere, or we were living in lands like desert or in Native America or wherever. So we just don't know. But the point is, again, we can't go back to that as quote unquote the pristine world that we
no.
left behind because we've moved on and the knowledge we have accumulated is significant, which is why we have to re-upgrade, so to speak. Rather than go back to the previous version, we need to upgrade rest of the version to match up with it.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that that's what Vervaeke's trying to do, even beyond, I mean, because I see what he's doing with Rafe. He's involved with Rafe's community. He's, which he really is very grateful to be because that's participatory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the evolve, move, play, all of that is absolutely spot on, including other modes of engaging with people outside of just the community making.
Yeah, um, and then so then we're from here we're diving into cognitive science, right?
Exactly, exactly. So let me set it up what I found that chapter to be so interesting.
Yeah, please.
In my previous lessons and learnings before I approached Vervaeke, I've been a student of philosophy over the years, um, and I would underscore student. I'm no expert, but I read all sorts of philosophical tracts growing up, both Western, Eastern, along the way, from Stoics to Greeks to Indian philosophy to Sufi to etc. I have that bent of mind to appreciate what those are, and each of them I was trying to now look back and realize that I was trying to make sense of some of the uh, deeper pointers that all of them are pointing to about how to have a grip on reality. And I always thought, at least, that philosophy is what glues it together. Like whatever sciences you
Yeah.
have, philosophy is kind of the bedrock upon which all of the queen of sciences, because philosophy is the upstream of all of the sciences that come downstream. That has been my belief, and to some degree, that's true. But what's interesting is last 200 years of philosophy has been complete and utter trash because of enlightenment and the secular view of experimentation in science has
Mhm.
completely wiped out the bedrock of philosophy, and it's become just either linguistic shenanigans, symbolic manipulation, or at best, some fundamentalist view of philosophy like propositional, etc. So, and those so-called philosophical views on society, like Marxist or fascist or racist, all of those have been unproven. I mean, have proven to be horrible. So, in a certain way, there has been a collapse of philosophy completely to go
So,
alongside to go alongside the collapse of meaning making. And what I thought until recently, before discovering Vervaeke, was that some philosopher would have to come about and try to make sense of a new way to think about philosophy to make progress on meaning making. And
yeah.
what's interesting to me, which is why I love this particular chapter on cog size, is that he is doing something very profound where he's saying, actually, cognitive science, which is the intersection of all the scientific methods, all the scientific way, all the benefit of enlightenment, etc. Cognitive science, properly understood, can be the bedrock on which the philosophy can be glued together. Right?
Yeah,
So that's why what I
like
loved
it.
about, and I had been individually exploring things like information, the informational view of brain, AI, AGI, etc. I've been individually been curious about psychology, from William James to all the psychologists, from Freud to modern CBT, etc., cognitive behavior therapy, etc. I've been individually exploring things like culture and anthropology and brain science, etc. But what he does, which I think is a master move, he layers out 5 different branches or disciplines, and he says all 5 belong to Cogsci,
Yep. I
right?
like that too a
And then
lot.
he says, by the way, the glue between them is going to be philosophy.
Yeah, which I thought was really brilliant. So, like, here's where philosophy is indispensable, but
Yes.
only if it's combined with these other perspectives, right? So it's not on its own separate. It's actually, intertwined, because it has to be kind of
Yeah.
like, what they talk about, the Greeks would wrestle before they would philosophize. So it was an integrated system rather than a separate, fragmented system.
Yeah. So you can't
And
approach philosophy. For example, what I found really interesting, just to build on what you're saying, is that if you look at each of these sciences alone, they have gone off the rails. Like in the branches of, let's say,
totally,
anthropology, which is like you look at it and say, how far have they come from a good grip on what it means to be a rational human being and have an anthropological view of societies. Um, and if you look at linguistics, it's become completely just symbolic logic,
yes,
linguistic
totally.
analysis. So if you look at each of these branches on their own, you can see where each of these disciplines have gone off the rails in many areas. What he's doing is taking the best parts of each of these that are still anchored in science, and he's saying that should be part of CogSci,
Yeah,
which I think is very interesting because I'm close to, for example, computer science and AI. And if you look at computer science AI experts, they are completely off the rails because they don't have any understanding of rest of the branches of CogSci. And
right.
they think that their philosophical view of some AGI machine coming and eating us all, or robots taking over, is their philosophical endgame. And they really have no idea because they're so narrowly limited only in one branch of so-called CogSci, right?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's like part of one of my confusions for years was, I was trying to find therapists to help me because I had, I've had a lot of trouble in my life emotionally. And the thing that I couldn't quite get over is how messed up most of them were. And I was like, I could see it myself. Like, it's not, and I was like, what's the hell? And because here's my opinion: if you are truly an expert on human behavior and human conditions, why are you so screwed up? That doesn't make any sense. And it's the same. Like, for example, one of the most screwed up people I've ever met was a PhD psychologist,
There you go.
and she had no self-awareness. And well, by the way, she was traumatized as a child, and I just knowing her, I knew this, and also in her adult life. And she had no perspective, and any suggestions from me were met with this disdain because I wasn't a PhD psychologist. And I'm just like,
And
Jesus, like, I mean, come on, like you're crippled, and yet you have this degree that proves that you know more. Well, I don't buy it because you're not functioning in the way one would expect. And I don't mean perfect. I mean, everyone has blind spots, and I'm talking about fundamental disruptions of basic functions, and with no tools at all to navigate it. And I've known 2 PhD psychologists that are like that, and I'm just astonished. I mean, it's like, you've got all these credentials, but you are not functional. That doesn't make sense
which
to me.
reminds me of the book I was hearing about. I've not read it, called Bad Therapy. Have you read that
Mm.
or heard about it?
I've heard about it. Yeah, it's I think I know some of the ideas already, because there's a lot of pushback now, kind of saying that the therapy in the modern world, especially the last 20 years, is ruining people. It's actually turning them to victims, and you know, just ineffectual victims that just just kind of whine a lot in their lives and don't do anything about it. Um, I mean, I wouldn't doubt it because I see it all over the place. I mean, the behavior and the identification. I mean, you would think with all the therapy available that everyone would be a lot better. But see, again, this is another indication of the dysfunction of the system.
That's
Is
right.
that I don't see, people have gotten more settled and more functional in the last 40 years. God, they've been worse than I've ever seen. I mean, it's just pathetic.
And I
God,
think
I mean,
to me, the not only is the current modality of the way therapy is given bankrupt, but even the basic premise that I need a therapist all my life and I'm going to get
exactly.
better and I'm going to get no better. So this idea that, it's like a crutch that we will never take away. And
Absolutely. I mean,
no
it's like
crutch,
a
you'll
security
even go
blanket. It's
further.
like
It's like,
sucking your thumb. I mean, but because here's the whole thing is that my interpretation of what a transformative practice in a shaman figure is to transform you, and then it's yours. I mean, that's you, right? You don't need them anymore.
it's
Now,
on.
maybe you would come back for more transformation, but I think fundamentally it's the empowerment of teaching people the process of transformation and reframing that is, kind of the fundamental truth of what it means to help somebody else.
So
Right?
funny that's the least of the interesting things. And other thing I really liked was that he starts using this idea of a metaphor in this chapter, and he talks
Yeah, yeah.
about metaphor as a way of breaking through, and it's very profound because metaphor I've also elsewhere he starts pointing to, and I've read elsewhere, as the only mechanism that points you to something without being able to give you a precise deductive logic to it, right?
Well, it's a
Meaning,
bridge,
it's a
right?
poetry. Is that the why poetry is so powerful and by
Mhm.
some considered the highest form of art form, because it cannot spell out. If it's spelled out, it's already trivial. It points to something, but it remains just out of comprehension because it's tough. It's the next level out. So I think the idea of a metaphor and the way he describes it intellectually as both something that highlights the difference and highlights the similarity between two things. And for you to figure out, are we pointing to the difference in two objects when we are comparing them metaphorically, or are we talking about the similarity? And what exactly of all the infinite possibilities and attributes that could be compared, what exactly are the differences and similarities that are relevant in this case? And I think that's a beautiful way of kind of what I would call throwing an atomic bomb in your frameworks to say, whatever you were thinking, rethink with this metaphor.
No, I think that's really well said. How you just framed it, and I want to add a little detail to that is that through McGilchrist's work, here's what I came to understand is that there's certain things in existence that cannot be examined with the left brain focal point. It has to be seen, and that's the metaphor is the bridge here. It has to be seen by the intuitive right brain kind of view, because if you try to nail it down with the left brain, you lose it. And so metaphor is the bridge, and that, like you said, poetry, it bridges those two worlds and leaves you with the essence of something that you sense rather than see and define, right? That it's really profound. When I read that in his book, I was like, this is so true. Because he's like, he goes, go ahead and define love. Yeah, give me a scientific explanation of love. And it's like, you can't do it because the minute you start down that road, you're not in love anymore. You
Yeah.
can't, that's not how it is. I mean, describing it isn't it. And so
Yes.
you have to be in it. And I was like, that you have to be in the process of it. And so there we
And
are.
I'm so glad you brought Ian because, and I'm reading his, Matter with Things. I'm through most of his first book. So
Oh, you're doing pretty good. What do you think so far?
amazing,
Oh
amazing.
yeah,
I've
it's
read
it's
his previous one, but I agree with you and your earlier comment that this is a masterpiece, right? Matter with Things. And so I'm working my way through it. It's beautiful. And I think he bridges and builds upon his previous two-part brain theory in hemisphere theory in such a beautiful way, much more so than he did in the previous book.
And isn't he an absolutely fantastic writer? I mean,
He is. He's a gem of a man.
it's awe-inspiring to me that he actually pulled that off, because that book is, it's 10 years of writing, but a lifetime in building up to it, obviously.
And
so
coming back to the Coxeye part, I think he talks about metaphor, but he also talks about metaphor in the way you are talking, that it's a ground for intuition, or maybe a pointer to intuition, and not really something you can bring back to the left brain. So it is definitely a right brain, right hemisphere activity that allows you to make sense of the whole, and see some possibilities that you have to then work on.
yeah, I mean, the left brain still kicks in when you want to investigate, but the wholeness of things, the interconnectedness, cannot be seen by the left. So it's and that's what Vervaeke's saying, obviously, as well. Yeah, interesting. And I also like what he says too, right? Let's see, where was this? He says that so cognitive science aims to unify these diverse approaches to avoid wait a minute. It involves integration of multiple disciplines, each providing different perspectives and methodologies to understand the mind's reality. Right. This is, and by the way, I think this is not a quote, by the way. This is just some notes. But here's the thing I think is so profound, is that the structure of cognitive science mirrors this I think the function, the ideal function, as McGilchrist talks about it, of the brain, because you have to look at things from multiple perspectives if you have any chance of knowing what the truth is and how to act in a way that is in accordance with reality, right? So I think that this cognitive science, when they realize that we have different views that we're not sharing, and we need to share them to be more functional, I do think that this is the future of meaning making, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things I liked this particular, just to second part of this chapter, where he talks about metaphor, but then what he does is something very interesting. Vervaeke, once again, I thought it was a genius move where he explains what it means that something is plausible.
Ah, yes, indeed.
And he has a beautiful framework. And I've seen him use that framework in some other videos and other projects, etc. And what's interesting to me is that he's not saying this is a logical framework. He's not even saying this is correct and accurate and scientifically proven framework. He's very careful. He's saying, if you want to make sense, you need to go out and project what is possible, plausible. And he's very limited and constrained in having truth claims around plausibility, right? He's saying, I'm not saying plausible equals true. I'm not saying plausible equals must be true or whatever. He's saying plausibility is the basis of making progress, because that's, I would say, an act of imagination, act of understanding. And he's building that from the idea of metaphor. And he's saying, if you generalize this idea of metaphor, that there are differences and there are similarities, and then you build a general purpose plausibility framework, that I thought was interesting, because on the input side, he says you need multiple senses, multiple channels of information, multiple sources of information. And all of these, whether it's multiple people, multiple senses, and multiple channels and sources, they all contribute as input to building the trustworthiness of something that's a hypothesis, something that is plausible. And
well,
on the
no, go ahead. Sorry, finish
and on
your
the
thought.
output side, he says, whether that plausibility construct can be deployed in multiple new areas or domains, right? So
that proves it's what do you call it? Value, right? If it can be deployed, yeah, right.
Explanatory.
It's transferable, like, is what he's saying. It's transferable, yes.
Exactly. So, and he says convergence, that should be trustworthy, and then divergence that leads to elegance or explanation or some plausibility. And he calls this like process of converging and then potentially diverging for exploration as a plausibility construct. I found that fantastic.
You say that again, that part?
So he's basically saying something very interesting. He's saying the way to think about, if you are just riffing, let's say you and I are riffing at the edge of our knowledge of some subject. In your case, whatever your profession is, in my case, whatever I consider to be the edge of my knowledge in some topic I'm good at. If I want to figure out, is something plausible? What about XYZ in your edge of your knowledge or my edge of my knowledge or a domain? What I would do is I would look at all the inputs I could say, here's a line of investigation.
Right.
Second line of investigation. Here's a third and independent channel of data. Here is other anecdotes. Whatever the channels are, sources are, credible sources are, it'll have to be multi-sensory, it'll have to be multi-source, it'll have to be multiple areas. And he's basically saying, the more you have those converging, the more trustworthy your intuition would be around those. That's not to say true, but it will be trustworthy.
Yeah, it's more likely, right? I mean, you're narrow because you have multiple inputs from different perspectives, so to speak.
Exactly. And you get a grip on something that is coming from multiple places. And then on the divergent side, if that construct that you have, an intuition, an idea you have, explains a lot of new things downstream, in domain A, domain B, domain C, you would say, wow, this intuition is actually quite powerful because it explains elegantly something new in area A, area B, area C, right? So he's saying that's the divergence elegance. And basically converge, diverge to check out plausibility.
Right, and you have to do that. You have to go narrow, go broad, go narrow, go broad from different perspectives to have a chance of figuring things out. Yeah, that's really well said. It's kind of it's almost like a pendulation back and forth from those two places.
And then I think he compares it to the fact, and he says that it's not a foolproof mechanism because you can go wrong. And he gives a very interesting corner cases that if you have low convergence, meaning you don't care about the trustworthiness of what you're converging on, but you believe that it explains everything, then you're in the conspiracy theory.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right. That just shows because you're using one perspective and one philosophy to explain everything without checking it out any other way, right?
And the opposite he says is that when you have high convergence, but it has very little explanatory power, it's like trivia. Like, okay, so what?
Oh, that's right. I remember he actually talked about this early on in the lectures, but then he brings it back here. I forgot about that. That's such a great thing to come back to because that's how people get stuck, right? Exactly. Yeah, if you go too far in one direction, then it's kind of trivial and meaningless, and if you go the other way, you're a fanatic, right? So you're, and I wanted to say this is an interesting point because I actually went over this a couple times. Equivocation. You remember that part? Because I was kind of intrigued by this.
Go on, please share.
So equivocation is when you misuse the same term in a different context. So what he says is that what's happening in the modern world is you have a scientist that's using a term or a concept from science from another discipline that they don't actually understand. And that is so true. Oh my God. Like when I read that and I finally got what he meant, I was like, I see this constantly where they misrepresent they construct ideas based on these misunderstandings of all these different principles, and then they're so arrogantly sure they're right, except they don't know what they're talking about at all. It's like you said, it's all bullshit because it's all fragmented, unclear bullshit that they put together into this hyperlogical crap that they believe and other people believe.
So true. That's actually very, very nicely done. I agree with you, and it's especially true in what I would say very abstract science domains where you have not abstract, very special purpose concepts in quantum mechanics or in physics or computation or AI or whatever. They're very precise, narrow concepts, but then people fall in love with it and they just kind of stretch it to mean whatever they want to mean it.
Yeah, it's been kind of throughout my life. I mean, this is the thing that's interesting when I watched the interview with Rafe and this guy Jordan, I forget his first name. I was astonished how parallel my life is with Rafe. It's so similar, our backgrounds, our parents, that I actually got a little upset, not at him, but just because I was thinking about how it paralleled my struggles. And one of the things that he said was his father he wasn't a good parent. He was very self-absorbed. Now he did amazing work, but he would neglected the family, and he spent all his money on his projects, and he wasn't around. And then he cheated on his wife. And so at some point when Rafe was pretty young, I think he was a teenager, he confronted him and he said, you know, his dad was actually whining, I guess, about something. He goes, "Why do you guys appreciate me more?" And he says, "Because you're an asshole. Like, and because you created this yourself." And his father's response was, "We all create our own reality, and you know, you're just creating your own reality." And that's it. By the way, that's exactly what my parents told me when I complained to them about how they were with me. And it is such a disconnection from anything real. Oh my God, to say that to, you know, when you confront someone with that much evidence, you know, "Dad, you're an asshole because you don't take care of us, because you didn't spend money, you don't spend time with us, because you cheated on your wife and you broke up the family. And now you're saying that the problem is that the way I frame reality in my own mind." It's like, what a piece of shit that is. But that's exactly what the postmodernists believe.
That's right. That's right. I
That's
think
exactly what they believe.
once you uncouple, once you become relativistic to truth, as especially when you have this view that, you know, the truth doesn't matter, then everything is. You know, what's interesting about that view is that it is instantly self-negating.
Absolutely.
Like the moment you say that the truth doesn't matter, then you yourself have taken yourself out of any conversation, including the fact that I don't need to believe a word that you say yourself.
Well, I mean, you can just put it back. I mean, it's so funny because it's like, you know, if you believe that, if you actually believe that everyone creates their own reality, then if you're upset at me for something, then that's your problem too. So it's like it's complete bullshit right there, but they never see it that way. They only use it to get out of responsibility and to get themselves out of a corner.
Which is why you just reminded me of that beautiful little book that Vervaeke introduced very early called On Bullshit. Have you read that?
I haven't read it yet. I'll put it on my list.
It's actually a very short read. It's like 70 pages, and it's like almost like a pocketbook. So you can read it like I read it in 25 minutes. So a very interesting short read. But what's interesting about that is the word bullshit. And what I really loved about that book was this insight that bullshit is not falsehood. Bullshit is effectively deflecting from you to even think about truth or falsehood.
I didn't realize that. Is that how he defines it? That's really interesting.
It is brilliant.
Interesting.
So when somebody is lying to you, they are counting on your ability to believe in the truthfulness of what the lie is so they can cheat you.
Yes.
Right? Whereas when somebody is bullshitting you, they want you to not think about truth or falsehood. They're just trying to, it's like squirrel, like distract.
You're right, squirrel.
You know what I mean? It's like, so that to me is so much about it, right? So much of the bullshit that you fall into when you are in postmodern world is because you're like, you have lost any ground of truth versus lie. You're just completely beholden to any shiny object.
It's like when my girlfriend and we like to go to the museums. We love art. And we went to the Legion of Honor, which is one of the nicer museums here. And there was these pieces by some modern artist. It was basically a glass toilet that had been distorted, and the toilet was yellow glass. And this is right next to Rodin. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, and the thing that's so hilarious about it is all these people are saying, "Oh, it's so profound," and blah blah blah. Exactly. And I'm like, for me, it's like it's an ugly chunk of yellow glass that doesn't belong here, and it has to take some gymnastics of bullshitting for anyone to think that has value, in my opinion. Exactly. And I'm not against all modern art. I actually think that certain artists like Giacometti and what's his name, Duchamp, and even what's Pollock. I think Pollock's work has merit, but these things are beyond
Yes,
my
they are
absolutely
conceptual stunts. They are not even.
wow, you know, and so there's the rot right there. It's like, you know, oh yeah, it's you know, that we're gonna put that next to a Verdun. Really?
I hear you.
Sorry, it
Totally hear you.
doesn't isn't equivocal. Oh, we're at 9 already, so I guess
We're
this is
doing
what we did.
good. So this was very interesting because I think now we are getting to some really juicy bits about how to
Yeah,
start making sense. And as he starts going deeper into exposition of his frameworks.
I'm really looking forward to this next half because it's kind of a. I mean, I'm guessing that we'll get a little bit more direction about how to make meaning.
Exactly.
So,
Hold ourselves, conclude this session, and we'll set up the next one in a minute.
okay, let's do that. Thank you.